Hello everyone, this episode is titled Equal Opportunities, and it is a sneak peek into the matter of how can equal opportunities be generated while at the same time avoiding to step too close to a communist governing system. This is done by keeping both private and public domains available and fairly split inside the state. Let's talk a bit about the resources which can be found inside the country. They can be split into two categories. The first category, which exclusively form naturally, without man's intervention. And the second category, which don't exclusively form naturally. These two categories are mutually exclusive, and I suppose that they can cover all the possibilities. So, the first category. These resources are found by man in nature, but without him having any intervention in their formation. Examples are ore, coal, oil, etc. If you ask me, these resources should belong to the public domain of a state, which means owned by the citizens as a whole, which means that their exploitation can't be monopolized by any private organization. The work provided for their extraction is financially rewarded, of course, but the extracted resources need to be shared equally between all the citizens, because the amount of these resources can be limited, and some people which are financially above the rest can monopolize them quickly, thus blocking the rest from having a chance in acquiring their share. This equal sharing can be done through rationalization, which would mean that each citizen has a well-determined quantity reserved for himself to financially purchase, in case he is interested, the resource. This amount should be the total quantity of the resources divided by the total number of citizens from the state. In order to not have citizens which are not interested in the acquisition of these resources, or which don't have the necessary finances to acquire them right now, in order to not have these citizens block the resources for the rest, which might need more than their reserve share, an expiration date needs to be provided for a share. When the expiration date arrives, the corresponding share becomes available to be purchased by anyone interested without constraints on who should have priority for it. And having exposed these measures, we can answer this question now. Why are these rationalization measures necessary? Well, I think they're necessary for all the citizens to have equal chances to get naturally formed resources which might otherwise be monopolized by private organizations and thus become impossible to acquire. This needs to happen even if these resources are found on private property, because otherwise private organizations would seek to monopolize them through the acquisition of the land, turning the land into private property in order to exclusively gain its resources. So I suppose that these measures are needed in order to have equal sharing of naturally formed resources. The second category, resources which don't exclusively form naturally. Examples are trees, because these can be regrown by human beings, crops, finished products like foods, beverages, containers, tools, vehicles, electronic hardware, software, etc. These resources should belong both to the public domain of a state and the private one. This means that these resources can be exploited by both by the owners of the public domain or by the owners of private domains, depending on who is interested in exploiting such resources. There should be no restrictions imposed on the quantity of resources owned by the citizens in this case, with just one exception, which I will try to expose next. So these resources can be produced without any constraints on either public or private domain. Now let's talk a bit about the state, its land, and splitting this land into public and private domain. In order to have equal opportunities, there needs to be a maximum limit of land area which a citizen can privately own. This maximum area should most likely be agreed upon through public and recorded vote. The rest of the land area, which should be the biggest part anyway of the country, should belong to the public domain, which means equally owned and exploited by all the citizens from the state. That's because the state is the single public organization and also should be the most powerful organization from the country. Why is this? Because it is shared between all the citizens. If private organizations would become the most powerful in a state, that would not be the desired outcome, because what is shared by the most needs to be the most influent, the most powerful. So all the resources exploited on the public domain, whichever category they fall into, 1 or 2, should be rationalized, as explained earlier, in order to produce equal opportunities for acquiring them. This is for the resources exploited on the public domain by the state, or for the naturally formed resources which are found either on public or private domain. The state, now we'll talk a bit about what the state is responsible for when it comes to building structures and maintaining them. So the state should build and maintain the networks, which means road, phone, internet. Also the legal institutions, which are required for its functioning. And also the state needs to have an industrial part of its own, consisting of buildings which produce resources, as explained earlier, buildings which are found on the public domain and belonging to the public domain. That way, and another thing that the state needs to have is a public budget, which is owned by all the citizens, just like the land and the institutions, from which to deduct these expenses. The public budget should grow either through equal percentual contributions from its citizens, contributions which are in finances or services to the state, which are provided when a well-defined project needs to be implemented and not before. So the public budget should either grow through these contributions or through the profit it makes from the industrial buildings which are public, meaning owned by the state. State has its own industry and the profit goes to the public budget. All the resources exploited on the private domain, which fall into the category 2, belong to the owner of the private property and should be freely used by the owner as he sees fit, which means no constraints available when it comes to quantity of resources or the requirement to share them to others. There shouldn't be any taxes imposed also on the profit made by private organizations. Why are these measures necessary? Well, they're necessary for all the citizens to have equal chances to purchase the same amount of private land, which might otherwise be monopolized by private organizations which are financially superior to the rest. This could be done by those private organizations by purchasing the majority of the land and keeping it blocked for others which don't have enough and might need to use that land. So this is all I could think about for now. I hope I can cover the topics in more detail in the future. Keep this idea in mind, and someday we can try to implement these measures for a better society. So thanks for watching.